My critical reading inventory was done with a student named Dan, who I had in my regional summer school this year for grades 11 and 12 ELA. He is an 18-year-old male student from a local school district. He dislikes reading aloud and reading independently. He likes working with others and orally discussing his findings. His strengths are listening comprehension, even with difficult material, and his weaknesses are oral reading and word decoding skills. In my intervention plan, I broke it down into um, various sections, including phonemic awareness and phonics intervention. In this intervention, we would work on syllable units because Dan seems to have more trouble with multi-syllabic words when he tries to attack or decode the word. I would introduce prefixes and suffixes, which would actually increase his vocabulary and knowledge. And we would use flashcards for continuous study, especially if he was finished with a project or an assignment, he could just easily take those out and work on them alone. Next, I broke it down into sight word and vocabulary interventions. Overall, Dan seems to need just a vast exposure to vocabulary. He is from a lower socioeconomic status background, which statistically students or children from these backgrounds are less likely to be exposed to as many vocabulary and higher vocabulary words as higher socioeconomic status students. I would employ peer tutoring, which would be with a student who Dan felt comfortable with at or above his level. And again, flashcards with the sight words and new vocabulary terms on them. Next, oral reading intervention. Dan seems to have difficulty with phrasing words into meaningful sentences or phrases, and his oral reading is very monotonous and just doesn't have much intonation or expression in it, which probably decreases his overall comprehension because he's more so about just reading to get it done versus actually trying to comprehend it as he reads. This can be done through repeated readings, modeling, especially when using the listening passage preview and audio listening passage preview. In the listening passage preview, I would read the reading passage aloud to Dan, not only to expose him to what he's about to read himself, but also to show him the appropriate oral reading strategies and skills that I would like to see him try. And then he would try it himself. Next, the audio listening passage preview is where a student reads a passage aloud and records himself, and then listens for strengths and weaknesses within their oral reading. Especially with Dan, because of his self-esteem, most likely because of his lower reading abilities, I would model this by doing it myself with a poor and good reading of the passage, and then discuss what he thought was good and what he thought was bad about each reading. Next, I labeled it critical thinking and comprehension intervention. Dan it doesn't seem like he's focusing on the content. Again, it's just about reading to get it done. I would employ the sequence instruction, so then he is using the details to put the order of events in order, and he's focusing much more on the actual content of the reading, as well as summarizing the content in the reading, because I think this will really help him, and I think he'll enjoy this because he does enjoy discussing what he's read. And if he's told to summarize or paraphrase in his own words, he's obviously needing to focus on the details and focus on what is important in the reading. Next is overall the reading motivation. To increase Dan's reading motivation, I would employ verbal praise. It would be very specific versus generic. So specific would be thank you for using such and such decoding strategy or such and such um, vocabulary strategy versus oh, good job. This way he knows that he did a specific strategy that we might have been working on correctly, and he also hears the praise and he knows what he did right, which will hopefully increase his self-esteem with his reading abilities. And overall, I would also give him some little tangible rewards. And some people may be against this, but when you think about it in the real world and outside of school and everything, we get tangible rewards. We get in the form of a check, in the form of promotions and things like that. So a little gum or something like that here and there is not horrible, especially for a student who needs to eventually internalize this motivation. But as of right now, he's much more intrinsically motivated. I'm sorry, externally motivated. For formative and summative assessments, I would do overall teacher observations, quick little oral reading assessments and comprehension questions, short sight word checklists, discussions. Again, Dan enjoys discussions overall, discussing what he read or what he thought about the reading. Exit slips, in which I would perhaps just write down an example question from one of the little mini lessons on vocabulary or syllable units that we did and have him answer it quick. And graphic organizers, where he would organize his thoughts, organize his understanding of the text. Summative, for end results, I would use overall larger oral reading tests, comprehension tests, sight word tests, and writing and multiple choice responses. Communication of results, I would definitely discuss the growth of the student. They shouldn't be kept in the dark about their growth. I would actually have him create a graphic representation of the growth for each skill or each intervention that we're using. I would contact the parent or guardian through various formats, including email, letters, home, communication logs, parent-teacher, person-to-person in contact meetings. And I would also contact other content teachers, because I think this is really important, because they might offer some insight that I'm not aware of the student's strengths and weaknesses, and maybe what he is or isn't using within their own classrooms. Overall, for my reflection, positives, I think he's going to enjoy a lot of the discussions. I did observe him enjoying the discussions we had in 11th and 12th grade English during summer school. I would make sure a lot of the passages I used were about his interests, which he enjoys stuff about war, stuff about hunting, farming. He's actually a farmer, so that would pique his interest. And he's interested in learning unfamiliar words because he hasn't been exposed to a lot of the higher level vocabulary. Concerns, he is an older student, which means he has many years of feeling this failure, feeling this level of being unskilled. Overall, he's been unskilled or feels like he's been unskilled for years, and he's reluctant to orally read, but again, through practice and understanding each other and relationships, we should be able to get over this hurdle. Overall, what I learned is there's a lot to critical reading inventory procedures, all the different intervention program pieces, and that actually I could easily use this and should use this critical reading inventory and interventions for all students. I think a lot of times teachers just focus on students with special needs or younger students, thinking that by the time they leave elementary school, they should be done with generic or the basics of reading comprehension, and that's not true at all. So I learned that all of this can definitely benefit all students.